What is up, everyone? Brandon Ferst, aka First Report, representing the First Off the Bench podcast network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. Welcome in to another edition of In the Paint here on the network, where we break down everything college basketball has to offer. A lot to get to as we get you ready for the Final Four. This will be a solo pod for myself. Fortunately, some technical difficulties on Raider Jim's side, but we hope to have him back next week as we dive into horse racing, as we get ready for the original call to post, as we get you ready for the Kentucky Derby, and then obviously all the way into the summer leading up to the Breeders' Cup. But we do have some unfinished business with college basketball. As I mentioned, we started with 68, we are down to 4, and it's the usual suspects. 4 number 1 seeds, first time since 2008. We get that much chalk. Interesting kind of Sweet 16, Elite 8. I will get to all of that. Also, I've been saying we a lot already, a little behind the scenes. I recorded about 20 minutes of this and realized that no, I just wasn't recording after all. So during that, I was saying we a lot just because out of habit. But Raider Jim will be back next week. So if you do hear we, that's just Freudian slip or just me not being very smart, just kind of going through the motions. But we're going to be talking about college basketball and looking back on the Elite 8 and the Sweet 16 region by region. Then, of course, breaking down the Final Four and possible championship matchups that we have. But before I get into that, the coaching carousel does seem to be kind of winding down. As the last big domino or the last big job opening that needed to be filled, of course, was the Villanova job. And the reason it probably took so long is they were just waiting for the Maryland Terrapins and Kevin Willard to be eliminated and their season to end, and for him to, essentially shake hands and move on. Obviously, that was a bit of a rocky end. There are a lot of reports about team dinners he missed, and even before that, some comments from the coach about maybe the lack of funds in the athletic department. I think there are other words that were used, but you can go find that. But at the end of the day, Kevin Willard is at Villanova. And of course, that opened up the Maryland job, which looks a Sweet 16 team and a pretty big basketball power, at least, especially in that area. They go to Texas A&M and they bring Buzz Williams back to the Beltway. Of course, Buzz Williams, his kind of springboard, or at least after the Marquette situation, headed to Virginia Tech. Incredible run there with the Hokies, and then went to Texas A&M. He goes back to the Virginia area, or at least the Beltway area. He'll be there with the Maryland Terrapins. So best of luck for both of those, especially to Kevin Willard, of course. Myself, big Villanova fan, Philly school. Got to get them back on track because Kyle Neptune, great guy. Really nothing bad to say about him person-wise. Unfortunately, he just couldn't get it done at Villanova. So time to find something new, and hopefully Kevin Willard is the guy. Also, we saw, of course, here locally, the UCSD Tritons have an incredible run to the tournament, nearly took down Michigan, but a valiant effort. The kind of the side effect of that success, unfortunately, is some of the bigger schools look around and say, hey, I like what y'all are doing down there. I'm going to take this guy. And that guy is head coach Eric Olen. He will be heading to Albuquerque to take control of the New Mexico Lobos. Of course, Richard Pitino, very good run with the Lobos over the past few years. He left. He is now, so it's time for Eric Olen to take control in New Mexico. Again, it's kind of unfortunate for UCSD, but this is the trade-off of success, of being Cinderella. Some people like what you're doing and have more resources than you, but I do think UCSD will be in good hands with Clint Allard, who has been someone that has been on that staff for 11 years And most notably, obviously, the associate head coach, essentially the head coach in waiting, or definitely the number 2 in that situation. He will take over. I think that's a great hire. Obviously, he kind of very similar to Brian Dutcher, to Steve Fisher in terms of the associate head coach. I think he's just going to carry over exactly what Eric Olen did, what made UCSD so successful. And Clint Allard is a UCSD alum and had a very storied career with the Tritons, obviously back when they were D2, or at least definitely not at the D1 level. But his name is scattered throughout the UCSD basketball record books. So congratulations there. One little note here. We are 2 days removed from April Fools. The Buzz Williams story going from Texas A&M to Maryland did drop on April 1st. So, but again, we're 48 hours removed and no one said anything. So I'm going to assume that everything's on the up and up, but I do just want to put that safety net there. It did come out on April Fool's Day. And yeah, you don't want to get got that way when it comes to social media. So, but moving on, as we start to dive into the Final Four side of things, before we get to the men's recap and then the men's look to the weekend, I did want to shout out the women's Final Four, as we have gotten to the Final Four for them as well. Interesting little scheduling note here. The women were 1 day ahead, or at least they were running Friday to Monday, their little 4-day regionals. The men obviously go Thursday to Sunday. However, they kind of jumped ahead here going into the Final Four. So the semis will be on Friday, and then the championship will be on Sunday. Unfortunately, I don't believe this podcast will be going live until those semifinal games have passed. So just an interesting little scheduling note I did want to point out. But Texas, the 1 seed, they will be facing off against Dawn Staley's South Carolina. The Lady Cox, they are in a very, very familiar situation. The South Carolina has been a team that, I mean, Dawn Staley, since she started there, I think two years in a row, back to back, they kind of taken over for UConn. Even though UConn is back in the Final Four, they took down USC on the other side of the bracket in the regional final. Despite UConn being a 2 seed, going up against the 1 seed USC in that one, interesting to see UConn 15.5-point favorites. Obviously a big reason there, USC without star Juju Watkins. It would have been interesting to see if Juju was healthy, because I don't think it's as cut and dry that if Juju's healthy, the 1 seed just takes control, because UConn did take down USC last year against Juju, or with Juju, I should say. So again, not as cut and dry. UConn will be facing off against UCLA, making their first women's Final Four. So I personally, as a USC fan, not a massive fan of UCLA, but I do respect that program. So shout out to the Lady Bruins. We'll see how that goes. But South Carolina, UConn, that would be a very juicy matchup. Just from kind of a casual women's basketball fan. Obviously, those are the 2 big names, year in and year out. So to kind of see that maybe grudge match, if you will, in the final. But we'll see. I think Texas and UCLA would like to have something to say about that. But moving on to the men's side of things, as we dive deep into the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. Look, full disclosure, we have 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four, which doesn't necessarily mean we haven't had madness, but it's also true that we haven't had madness to the scale we're used to. We did have a couple good games this past weekend, or at least on Thursday and Friday. Unfortunately, the Elite 8 games were, for the most part, pretty much one-sided, but we'll start in the South, going region by region. And that's where Auburn resides, and that's where they got the job done. They took down Michigan State 70-64 in that Elite 8 matchup. A game that I didn't really think was ever in doubt. Maybe that score is a little closer than I felt it was, just watching it through the eye test. Auburn to their first Final Four, or excuse me, they're not their first Final Four. They'll be looking for their first men's basketball championship there. So they punched their ticket, the #1 overall seed. They, of course, did have to get through Michigan. They took care of the Wolverines. I was surprised to see how dominant Auburn was against Michigan. I expect Auburn to probably win that game, but I thought Michigan was going to give them a bit more of a fight in the end. But Auburn controlled that game pretty much from tip to buzzer, 78-65. And then Michigan State, Tom Izzo, he outlasted Chris Beard's Ole Miss Rebels 73-70. And then, of course, they would fall just a little short against Auburn in that Elite Eight matchup. So Auburn looking for their first national championship at the men's level. We'll see. Heading on to the west side of things, we have Florida coming out here. They have punched their ticket. They took care of Texas Tech. This was an interesting game. Again, only a 5-point victory when it's all said and done in that Elite Eight matchup for Florida. However, 5 points, that's not terribly indicative. It was competitive, but again, Florida, I felt like was in control throughout. So congratulations to the Gators. First Final Four since 2014. Of course, they had to take care of Maryland, the aforementioned Terrapins and Kevin Willard. They did, despite Maryland only trailing by 2 at the half. The second half, Florida did wear them down. That Sweet 16 matchup, Florida 87, Maryland 71. Again, just a little bit too much when it was all said and done. And then Texas Tech and Arkansas. What a matchup that was. Probably the best game of the Sweet 16/Elite Eight. Went to overtime. Texas Tech holds off John Calipari's Arkansas Razorbacks 85-83. Of course, would fall just a little shy in that Elite Eight matchup, but a fantastic season for the Red Raiders. Moving on to what did I have marked down right here? Pardon me. The East region. This was Duke's ticket to punch, and they did no real drama when it comes to Duke. The only real drama was whether or not Alabama would be able to keep shooting the way they did in their Elite Eight, in their Sweet 16 matchup, which I'll get to momentarily. The answer was no. Unfortunately, just a little too much athleticism for Alabama to deal with. Duke dominates Alabama pretty much from start to tip. Probably the most dominant performance. Houston was really good, but more on a defensive side of things. Duke 85, Alabama 65. How did we get there? Well, Duke dominated Arizona for most parts of the game. Now, Arizona continued. Caleb Love had an incredible game, nearly put them on his shoulders, and at the very least, got them within shooting distance. Just a little shy, though, Duke 100. Arizona 93. That was a really good game, but again, never really felt like Arizona was going to win. It was always a bit of, they're there, and, unless Duke just somehow just loses all momentum, but they never did. Cooper Flagg, absolutely incredible basketball player. And then, of course, there was that historic performance from Alabama. I tell you what, if you kind of write out how it would go down for BYU and you say, hey, you know what, you're going to score 88 points. They would have loved that. However, they score 88 points. They still lose by 25 as Alabama shoots 25 from 51. 25 from 51 from 3 to just essentially shoot BYU out of the gym. I mean, that's a game right there where there's nothing BYU could have done. I mean, maybe you could say, oh, get a little closer here on this wide open 3, but even then, take 3 or 4 3-pointers off the board, it's still a 10-point victory. So a dominant performance from Alabama, but again, it would not carry over against the Blue Devils. I do believe a lot of that was the difference in athleticism that Duke can bring to the table rather than BYU, those closeouts a little quicker, making them think a little bit more. And at the end of the day, they didn't have the missed shots. Duke was just pretty much making whatever they wanted. They ran their offensive sets very crisply and kind of controlled the game. BYU was perfectly fine just playing run and shoot with Alabama. And again, 88 points, 95% of the time in the tournament, 88 points is going to get the job done for you, but wasn't even close for him this time. Very unfortunate for BYU, but Alabama would, of course, fall to Duke when it was all said and done. Duke heading on to yet another Final Four. And then finally, we had the Midwest Regional. This was where we saw Houston emerge victorious out of the defense, out of the Cougars. Reminds me a lot of San Diego State, but on a higher level. Just obviously Houston, a bigger conference. They can recruit the Big 12 rather than San Diego State's Mountain West, really good conference. However, Big 12, a lot more money in that conference, a lot more money at the Houston athletic department there. So they were able to get the job done. A dominant performance. Again, you could maybe make the case they were more dominant than Duke, but I felt like that was more on the defensive side of things rather than overall, because look, Houston isn't a dynamic offensive team, and that's going to be very interesting to see how they match up with Duke, but we'll get to that momentarily. But Houston did dominate Tennessee. Again, I felt like it was like 35 or 38-11 with like 6 minutes to go in the first quarter. First half. It was never competitive. Tennessee just was absolutely suffocated. Kai Ziegler, and a couple others, they just couldn't get anything going. Houston dominates. They had a dogfight against Purdue, though, and Purdue fell just a little shy on that Friday night Sweet 16 matchup. Houston holds off the Boilermakers. Valiant effort from them. 62-60, a perfect. This is right where Houston wants to be in terms of points being scored, the pace of the game. So they get the job done in a very, very, probably the second best game behind the Arkansas Texas Tech of this 4-game block, or this 4-day block, I should say. And Tennessee takes care of Kentucky. Really another one of these that Tennessee dominated pretty much from tip to finish. Very, very unfortunate we didn't get any more competitive games, but 78-65 Kentucky. So the Wildcats, first year under Mark Pope, I would say a pretty darn successful season considering kind of the change in culture that is having to happen there at Kentucky, going from seemingly one and dones to not. 5th-year, 8-year seniors. You got Lamont Butler there, who it seems like he's been in college forever. So we'll see how that goes going forward for Kentucky. But Tennessee, not Bruce Pearl, but they get Rich Barnes, I should say, gets to the Elite Eight. Again, just didn't have enough in the tank against Houston. Very, very impressed with Houston dominating their way through this bracket in the Midwest, punching their ticket to yet another Final Four. Kelvin Sampson really revitalized this team. It seems like they've kind of gone back to the early 1990s Phi Slamma Jamma days. Obviously not the same type of team in the way they play, but definitely the success. All they're missing is the big one, and that's the championship. So speaking of, moving on to the Final Four preview side of things. Obviously, these games are going to be on Saturday and championship on Monday. I believe these games are going to be on CBS, but lately they've been on TBS. So who knows? Maybe they're going to be on TBS again. I'm sure you all can pop Google open and that'll figure it out for you. But Florida versus Auburn. It's going to be our first matchup of the Final Four weekend. Florida's 3-point favorites in this one. The over-under 159.5. Personally, I have been impressed with Florida really since February, since I really did. Again, full disclosure, I was really focused on football with my Eagles. Hope everyone likes my new hat. And if there's only podcast listeners, it's a beautiful Super Bowl champion hat. But anyways, so kind of focused my attention to college basketball fully about mid-February, and, Florida just coming out of not nowhere, but for me, just again, kind of just keeping one eye on college basketball from afar, and then seeing Florida, whoa, number 5 in the country or whatever, getting a chance to watch them and going, oh my goodness, this is a really good basketball team. I thought they were the second best team behind Duke coming into this tournament, and we could be lining up for that in the final, but I like Florida in this one. The betting angle side of things is very difficult when it comes to college basketball, whether you want to do the points, overall or the over-under. I'm more of a money line guy just because a lot of crazy things can happen. They're up 5, and with 2 seconds left, Auburn chucks a half-court 3. It goes in. Doesn't matter. Doesn't really count overall, but it screws your spread over. So I'll probably be taking Florida here. Money line, probably parlay it with my next money line. I don't want to spoil that. But I just think Florida's a better team. Auburn, really, really good team overall. Obviously, Broome, who knows, might win the Wooden. I think he's the second best player in the country, and there's nothing to sneeze at there. But unfortunately, Walter Clayton Jr., I think probably the third best player in the country. So that's going to be very tough for Auburn to deal with. Obviously, SEC foes going into this one. Florida is my pick, but I would not be surprised to see Auburn get the job done. Two of the 3 best teams, I believe, this season. Well, 2 of the 4 best teams. I don't want to, just totally take a backhand to Houston like that. But I really do expect Florida to come out and kind of suffocate Auburn, similarly to how Houston did Tennessee, not in the more dominant defensive way, but I think Florida gets out early and never really looks back. Just been really very impressed with Florida. So moving on to the nightcap, if you will, that will be Houston taking on Cooper Flagg and the Duke Blue Devils. Duke, bit of a higher favorite here, 5-point favorites, 136.5 is the point spread on this one. I believe I'm looking at my number I wrote down. I put 136.35. That can't be right. So it's in that neighborhood. I don't know if it's 136.5 or 133.5. I don't really want to look it up and find it right now. But anyways, Duke, 5-point favorites against Houston. Obviously, no matter what number I screwed up or whatever one's right, it's about a 20-point difference in this one. And a lot of that is because of the way Houston plays defensively and the way they want to play overall and pace-wise. And I think Duke's perfectly fine kind of playing a bit of a grind. I think they have faith that they will get up to, head into the half with a 10-point lead. And at that point, then Houston kind of has to get out of their element, and they do have to speed things up. I think that's what Duke, their game plan is get in front of these guys early, attack early. I cannot come up with enough superlatives about Cooper Flagg. I didn't think it was possible for this kid to come in with all of the flowers and everyone, at the prep level screaming, all right, college basketball fans, prepare yourself. Cooper Flagg's coming. For me, it was kind of like, all right, chill out. Like, there's no way it's this good. He's this good, I should say, or it's the hype is going to live up to it. Well, I think it actually surpassed it, which is absolutely incredible. I truthfully believe Cooper Flagg is one of the best all around college basketball players I have ever seen. Overall, look, I didn't see MJ in college. I didn't see Hakeem. I didn't see them. But, going from, let's say, 98 on, he is one of the top 5, I would say. And again, without seeing a list right in front of me, I would not be surprised to see if he ends up top 3, maybe best I've ever seen. He's absolutely incredible. He can shoot from anywhere on the floor. He can pass from anywhere on the floor. He can do anything on the basketball court. It's truly incredible. And if for whatever reason you have gotten an opportunity to see him, you need to find a way to get in front of the television to see this Houston-Duke game, because I am intrigued to see how Houston attacks Cooper Flagg in this one, because as good as Houston is, Cooper Flagg, I believe, is kind of it's one of those things where, you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. I believe that was I think that was a Stuart Scott ism, if you will, or maybe a Dan Patrick going back to the Sports Center days. But I mean, truly, you just kind of hope that, hey, he doesn't go for 20, 10, and 8 and totally take over the game. You kind of want to be like maybe 15, 5, and 3, which would still be a hell of a game for anybody in a Final Four. But for Cooper Flagg, definitely a down game. I just think Duke's too good. I've said from the beginning, Duke's the best basketball team. I don't like it. I don't like Duke, even though this Duke team is weirdly likable. I don't know. It's odd. I think maybe it's because it's John Scheyer. He's not exactly. Kind of wish it was JJ Redick there. I think that would be more on brand for Duke, just a little more hateable. Again, it just feels weird for me to be watching Duke and kind of having a warm, fuzzy feeling in my stomach. And like, hold on, that's the evil empire. But they've been very, very impressive. Cooper Flagg, again, is so good and very likable, if we're being completely honest. And we only get one more, maybe 2 more games at the collegiate level for Cooper Flagg, because he's not coming back next year, nor should he. Take your talents to the next level, and who knows? Maybe he's the guy who brings me back into the NBA, or at least maybe I watch some of his games, because I can't remember the last time I watched a full NBA game. But anyways, overall, all that long-winded to say I like Duke. Again, I really think I'm probably just going to parlay Florida and Duke in a money line. -5. I think Duke probably covers that, but I just worry kind of about those weird backdoor covers on, 3-pointers at the end when it doesn't really matter, when everyone's walking off and the walk-on jacks up a 3 to just get one up, and it goes from a 7-point win to a 4-point win, and I'm stuck holding a -5 ticket, feeling like a bozo. So give me the money line parlay, Florida and Duke. And that begs the question, the final question of the podcast. Who's it going to be then? And I feel like you probably already know where I'm going with this. Now, this is the matchup I want more than anything. Again, with all due respect to Auburn and Houston, I don't mean to discount them. Auburn's had an incredible season. Houston is this team that's just always there for the last 4 or 5 years. It seems like they have just continually kind of busted through the ceiling of the year before. Last year, it was finally getting to the Final Four. So then logically this year, it would be them getting to the championship game. I just think Duke's too good. And for Auburn, again, a magical, fantastic season, and they beat pretty much everyone, including Florida. I just don't think when all the chips are on the table, I just think Walter Clayton Jr. and the Florida Gators are going to get the job done. Duke over Florida. I'm calling it. Again, I don't know what the spread will be, but it's going to be pretty negligible. So I'll probably just hit the money line there on Duke, assuming they get through there. But, for whatever reason, Houston does take down Duke, and it's Houston, Florida. I think it's Florida. My power rankings for the Final Four, kind of just to tell you how I think it'll go if the finals don't go the way I expect them to. Of course, I don't know why you'd ask my opinion after I've been wrong, but I think Duke, Florida, Auburn, Houston is 1 through 4 power rankings essentially here, but I believe we're splitting hairs and Duke is the best. But these are 4. I think all 4 of these teams you could take and put into the tournament in the last 10 years, and they'd win maybe 60, 70% of them. The UConn ones would be interesting. I would have loved to have seen some of these teams go up against last year or 2 years ago's UConn, but we don't get the opportunity to do that. So I really just hope that all the chalk and all the kind of lack of madness, it will pay off in these final 3 games. I hope to get at least 2 really good ones. Obviously, you want all 3 to be amazing. And then, selfishly, I want to see Duke, Florida. I think they've been the 2 best teams all season. So why not settle it on the court? But they're going to have to earn their way through Houston and Auburn, respectively. So that is all I have for you here on this episode of the In the Paint podcast. Ooh, excuse me. My final thoughts. I've been kind of forgetting to do this as my final thought, because this is about 3 weeks too late, going back to essentially San Diego State being eliminated from the tournament. San Diego State getting eliminated from the tournament. Ted Leitner hanging up the headset. If you're a San Diegan, you know the name Ted Leitner. He is the longtime voice of the San Diego State Aztecs, formerly longtime voice of the San Diego Padres, stepped away from that. That's actually a lot more of a grind than the San Diego State, basketball season where it's only 30 games rather than 162. Travel isn't as crazy. So he stepped away from the Padres about 5 or 6 years ago. And then, if you're a San Diegan, you're about my age, mid 30s, Jerry Coleman, Ted Leitner, those were Bob Chandler, if you remember all the way back. But those were kind of the voices of San Diego and especially San Diego Padres. So I did want to shout out Ted Leitner as he is battling some health issues. And that's it. He's no longer going to be calling San Diego State games. Uncle Teddy, as we commonly refer to him here in San Diego. So I just want to tip my hat to him and, just thank him for the memories because, again, he is kind of the voice of my childhood and the voice of San Diego. If you listen to a San Diego team on local radio, more than likely it was Ted Leitner doing play-by-play. So, again, congratulations on retirement. Best of luck in retirement. Enjoy it. Enjoy the family. And again, thank you. So, with that being said, thank you for listening to this episode of the In the Paint podcast presented by the First Off the Bench podcast network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. It is time for you all to go wash your hands and stop hating everybody. We'll talk to y'all later. Take care.